Hi, I'm Raina Zima, videographer and editor here at TV3, and today we're going to be remembering Roger Engstrom. Roger was one of the hosts of our museum show here on TV3, and I was fortunate to get to work with Roger on all of the shows that he appeared in. And Roger first appeared on the Museum Roadshow as a guest in 2006, late September of that year, and he was the guest of Joanne Splonskowski. She was the director of the museum at the time. And he was in a few more episodes with Joanne, and then he appeared with Carolyn Ingebretson on some shows on Ice Harvest. And then in late May of 2007, he took the reins and started doing the Museum Roadshow on his own.
Well, welcome to the Museum Roadshow. I'm Roger Engstrom, a dairy farmer, retired from Becker County. I've been a lifetime resident of this county since I graduated Detroit Lakes High School in 1963.
Roger used to come into the museum, and he'd come in and do some research or just come in and talk. And Roger would, because he had his oxygen, sometimes he needed to go someplace and get charged up to where he could plug in his machine. And he always chose, a lot of times he chose the museum to come in. So while he was sitting there getting charged up, we'd talk, and he'd talk about this book that he wanted to put together, about pioneer homes. That idea of there's a lot of stories out there about farming and about the pioneers, but he wanted to do something on the personal end of things, give those personal stories about being slapped in the face with a tail while milking the cows one day, And he'd come in and do a little research, so I got to know him as somebody in the community that really knew a lot about the people and the area. So when somebody would come into the museum doing research and we were stuck, we didn't know, okay, where to go from here, we couldn't find it in a book, I'd get on the phone and call Roger and say, hey, I got something, do you know anything about this? And he'd either know something or know somebody who did. And a lot of times I could get the information over the phone, but more times than not, he'd offer to come into the museum and meet the people while they were still there. So he was a great resource for the museum because he had a love, a passion for history. He was a long-time member of the Historical Society itself, but he was involved in Rolog. He was involved at the fair. He got the Century Farm recognition program started in 1986 for the county. They had it going for the state, but he felt that on a county level there should be more recognition for that. So he got it going. So Roger wore a lot of hats. When I was starting to phase out of the museum, I had Roger on my show a couple of times back in 2006. And I just felt that Roger was a good person that could help take over that part of the museum. He knew so much, and I really feel that the community needed to know more of what Roger knew. So I asked him if he'd kind of help take over and do some of the museum road shows. And while I was there, I asked him to do one or two. And he didn't want to do it. And I kept, you'll be fine, just forget that thing's in front of you, but then just talk like you do to people. Because when he was talking to people, you could see that passion, you could see his eyes light up, and you knew he loved what he was talking about. And it wasn't any one thing. It wasn't just the farming and the agriculture. It wasn't just about tractors. It was everything. It was the people, it was the land, and it was the history of Becker County that Roger loved.
Roger was really the person that did all of the work on the Museum Roadshow. He lined up the interviews, he did all of the research, he essentially called me, told me where we should meet and when, and I showed up, turned the camera on, and then I just edited the pictures over the video or the interviews that we took. So he did all of the legwork and really made the show what it is. And and I can't express just how grateful I am to him and to all of the hard work that he put in for the show.
Roger was a really amazing friend to the museum and friend to all the people that worked there and volunteered there. He was our go-to guy for questions, so if you didn't know something or couldn't find something or had some very obscure question that no one could answer, you often could call Roger and he'd be able to come up with the answer for you. Maybe not right that second, but very soon after. He just was a really invaluable advocate for agricultural history in particular, but also just the history of Becker County as a whole. He was very interested, of course, in his history and the places that he lived and grew up, so around Pickerel Lake and that part of our county, but really kind of spread his interest around the whole county. So he would come in and tell me stories about how, oh, I was at the Frazee Care Center, or I was at the Sunnyside Care Center, or I was in town here and talking to some of those old timers, you know, which I always thought was so funny because he was really part of that group. But he loved to go and visit. He just kind of soaked in history in a way that you don't see people do much anymore. I think that kind of generation and that kind of level of interest is really starting to be lost. And he just loved it. He loved everything about it. He loved the research, which a lot of people don't like. He would spend hours and hours and hours sitting and reading newspapers and looking through files and reading books and you know, soaking in every little bit of information and then laughing and telling us stories on the side that he found while he was reading the paper, or making notes, and then a year later he'd come back and say, now last year when I was here researching that moving the house across the lake, I read a story about the ice out, and maybe we should do a little article about that. And then he would sit and research and write articles for the paper. He was a wonderful participant in the kind of preservation of history as well. He was very kind of deliberate about the way that he spoke and the way that he did his work and the way that he lived, I think. But with that kind of deliberate nature came these wonderful kind of narratives that were then kind of encapsulated in those museum roadshows that he put together. He was a great storyteller. He was fun to sit and listen to. He was fun to visit with, and we'll miss him a lot.
Roger volunteered at Emmanuel for about 17 years. He led a group called Four Wheelers. We were looking for someone to lead the group, and he answered the call. We asked him to name the group one day with the residents, and when it was over, I said, so what'd you come up with? And he said, Four Wheelers. And he said, because everybody is in a wheelchair. Roger would come in with things for the men to talk about. They'd sit at a table, drink coffee, eat cookies, and they were engaged. He had them laughing and smiling. They talked about farming, about roll log, machinery, anything that the guys would be interested in. One particular gentleman that I know he touched was a man who used to be a farmer for all of his life, and Four Wheelers was the only thing that he attended, and he got him engaged.
As you can see, Roger has had a huge impact on not only Detroit Lakes and Becker County, but in our personal lives as well. I'm truly honored to have gotten to work with Roger and just see his passion for history and just for people in general. And his legacy will live on forever here in Becker County and on TV3, as he would say, where history repeats itself every 4 hours.
Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Museum Roadshow on TV3. It's one place where history repeats itself every 4 hours. Thanks for watching.